How much of our driver earnings should come from tips? Unfortunately, as time goes on, more and more. That's a problem because there's a growing resentment from customers that feel like they shouldn't have to contribute to our wages. Meanwhile, DoorDash and Uber Eats keep lowering our base pay. So, what are we to do? We're caught in the middle. I'm of the opinion that companies like DoorDash and Uber Eats provide a luxury service that customers should pay up for. But, unfortunately, not everybody sees it like that. Specifically the customers. What's going on, everybody? I'm Zach Tries Fast for the RideShare Guy, and in this video, we're going to talk about how much of our income should come from base pay versus tips, and why it matters. In the last couple of weeks, we saw Uber implement some new feature where customers can now order from 2 restaurants in the same order. Now, this isn't to be confused with a restaurant order and a convenience order. Customers have been able to do that for a while. I'm talking about 1 order, 2 restaurants. Now, this is fine and well on the surface, and it might even sound good for drivers. The problem is, the customer isn't being charged any more in fees. Therefore, we're not making any more in base pay. Of course, some customers may tip more because they ordered more. However, I just don't like the prospect that we could potentially end up doing a lot more work for no more pay. Essentially, our workload could be nearly doubling for no guaranteed extra pay, and we're just relying on additional tips to make up the difference. The same thing is true with DoorDash in most markets. Drivers will only earn $2 for a double before tips. I can't speak for you, but I've been driving long enough that I can remember the minimum pay on a double on DoorDash being $5. Now it's $2. Customer fees sure aren't getting any lower, and meanwhile, driver pay damn sure isn't getting any higher. Matter of fact, some customers are getting flat out resentful that they're paying that much in fees and then being asked to tip on top of it. How do I know this? I've been the target of hundreds of customers spewing their hate and frustration in my direction. But I guess that comes with the territory of being on YouTube and talking about things that people feel strongly about. Additionally, to add insult to injury, in many DoorDash markets, the base pay was just slashed up to 75 cents per order, including in my market. This further widens the gap between the company's contribution and what the customer is expected to make up. On Uber, I've seen base pay below $1.50 per order in my market. These companies aren't doing the customers or their drivers any favors here. I want you to remember something. It's not just the customers that are paying fees here. On both platforms, restaurants can be charged up to 30% of the total order value. Let's say the customer ordered from one of these apps and they spent $50 on food. They may end up spending $10 to $12 in fees, which, for the sake of this video, may be a very generous example. But let's go with it. At 30% on a $50 order, the restaurant just contributed $15 in fees. That one order generated up to $25 in fees. I want you to stop here for a moment and realize something. Out of that $25, many of us are only going to see $2. That's before all of our expenses like footing the gas bill. Oh yeah, and we're the ones doing the work. Being is that we're being paid so low, and most drivers won't take a $2 order, rightfully so, it's falling on the customers to adequately compensate the drivers. Now, I've got 2 trains of thoughts here. The first one is, if you're using a luxury service and having somebody do something for you that you otherwise could have done for yourself, then you should compensate that person well. However, it needs to be reasonable. Let's say that the companies were to pay out half of the fees that the customer just paid to the driver, couple that with a $3 or a $4 tip. All of a sudden, the company's contributing a little more and the customer a lot less. In my opinion, this would make the customers a lot less resentful and keep them ordering. All right, admittedly, this has seemed like a really long-winded rant, which I'm really good at. So let's talk about what drivers can actually do about this. Of course, we can't make our customers tip more. Don't be the driver that texts them asking for more money. It's a surefire way to get yourself deactivated. I tend to wait in an area that's got less restaurants than somewhere like the mall, but as a result, there's less drivers. Also, almost every restaurant near where I wait is pretty fancy. I'm talking sushi joints, Thai restaurants, and Japanese places. These are the type of restaurants that are known for bigger tips. I find myself declining far less lowball offers when I wait there versus the mall or downtown. I want you to think about the psychology of this for a moment. If I go through the drive-thru at McDonald's, I'm expecting to spend anywhere between $8 and $15 on just myself. However, if I'm ordering my favorite Thai dish, it's more like $25 before a tip. Customers who are ordering from fancy places are expecting to pay more, and therefore tip more. So, while we can't do anything about base pay versus tips when it comes to our income, we can be more mindful of where we position ourselves. Here's something else that I've learned in my 3.5 years of driving. Customers who tipped you well to begin with are also the ones who are the quickest to give you even more money. There's a trick I use all the time with great success that I'd like to share with you. If the order isn't quite ready yet, I'll text the customer and say something like, "Hey, your order isn't quite ready yet. It's going to be another 5 or 10 minutes, then I'll be on my way. I'm sorry for the wait." This has resulted in additional tips numerous times. Most customers are reasonable and they appreciate you being communicative when they're hungry. Just be sure to not blow up their phone unless it's actually necessary. What started as an appreciated update could quickly turn into an annoyance if you overdo it. Here's another suggestion, a strong suggestion actually. Never take a low-paying order expecting a bigger tip after the delivery. If they didn't tip well, or even worse at all up front, they almost certainly aren't going to tip you after. Trust me, I've done that experiment. Before we get into this next part, I want to clarify my position on something. When it comes to food delivery apps like DoorDash and Uber Eats, non-tipping customers are the most problematic and should be avoided at all costs. That said, we do rely on tips for our income. So, how should our income break down when it comes to tips versus base pay? Personally, I like to see a 3-to-1 ratio. For every $3 I earn in tips, I'd like to see $1 in base pay. Now, of course, we're not going to know the breakdown of the pay until after the order is complete, but keeping it in mind will help you be more mindful about accepting profitable orders. In my opinion, this ratio matters because it's a measurement of how much the customers actually appreciate our time and how much they're willing to compensate us for it. If your ratio is closer to 1-to-1, you're accepting orders where customers aren't tipping very well, and you need to ask yourself what you can do to change that. Remember, if you're waiting in front of a bunch of fast food restaurants, you're going to get fast food pay, but if you're waiting in front of somewhere fancy like a steakhouse or a sushi restaurant, you're probably going to be paid a lot more. Right or wrong, a huge percentage of our income does rely on tips, so we need to be exceedingly careful with what we're accepting. Remember, a customer who respects your time will tip you well for it. Focus on those customers. With all that said, that's not necessarily the case on all gig apps. While DoorDash and Uber Eats are expecting the customer to foot the driver's pay almost entirely, not all apps are like that, and some of them pay a lot better than food delivery. I've been talking about it a lot lately, but Walmart Spark is a perfect example. On any given Spark order, it can come down to a coin toss whether there's going to be a tip or not. With Spark, I am nowhere near as adamant about seeing tips for 2 reasons. Number 1, the customers aren't always given the option to tip on Spark, and number 2, generally speaking, the base pay is enough to get the order delivered. I'm not saying that you should just do Spark or that you should just do food delivery. What I am saying is that they should coexist in your arsenal. Over the last year or so, I've been earning less in tips, but haven't noticed a huge impact to my income. This is because I take opportunities when they present themselves. For example, during peak hours, I typically do food delivery. This is when customers are actually hungry and tipping well to get their orders quicker. During non-peak hours, I'll typically turn to Spark, where there may or may not be a tip, but there's almost certainly going to be good base pay. To summarize this video, we'll never be able to control how the companies act or how the customers tip. It's a cat and mouse game, and we need to be able to pivot on a dime. DoorDash knocking my base pay down by 75 cents in my market is substantial, but in the grand scheme of things, I'll probably notice little to no difference because I've given myself so many tools in the form of apps. What about you? Do you have any tips for staying profitable with ever-decreasing pay? If so, leave them in the comments. If you haven't done so yet, please do consider pressing the like button and subscribing to the RideShare Guy. You can catch my videos here every Tuesday. If you enjoyed this video, you may also enjoy this video where I talk about the metrics that actually matter. I'm Zach Fast for the RideShare Guy. Take care.